Hello everyone, my name is Bryce Alvord and I am your LSAT tutor here at IBIS Prep. So I just want to give a quick lesson today, and it's a piece of a larger lesson that I give all my students, and it's about a particular type of logical reasoning question. And those questions are necessary assumption questions. So necessary assumption questions I know confuse a lot of students. Honestly, it really used to confuse me as well. So I'm going to give you kind of a visual aid today that's going to help you understand a little bit more what necessary assumption questions are really asking. This lesson does fall into the grander scheme of how I teach the LSAT and how we teach it here. And that is to fundamentally teach you how the LSAT is going to attack you, okay? Because what the LSAT does is it tries to throw you off by being very creative with its subject matter, meaning we can read a question and it can be talking about a balloon store or a specific type of plant or what the mayor of a small town is saying. But it is not creative in testing your understanding of arguments and how they are put together. It does the same thing over and over and over again. Okay, friends, so as promised, here we have on an X and Y axis strength and argument. And it's meant to portray that the argument goes up, gets better as the strength goes up. Okay? There's almost no argument on earth that is not vulnerable to strengthening and weakening. That is why there are lawyers to go back and forth with each other about these things. We could argue on both sides about the sky being blue. But I digress. On to necessary assumptions. Necessary assumptions are here at the bottom, and they're here at the bottom for a reason, because necessary assumptions are assumptions that are necessary for the argument to stand any chance at being valid or getting stronger. They're here at the bottom because if we negate them, the argument falls apart completely. It is dealt a death blow, a nail in its coffin. It's over if the necessary assumption is false. So they need to be true for the argument to stand any chance at all, okay? Now, going on to the larger part of the lesson, or what we would go for, sufficient assumptions are different and they must be treated differently because sufficient assumptions basically prove arguments, okay? And a lot of students confuse these two things. There's also general strength questions, okay? All three of these on the strength spectrum are about 25% of all logical reasoning questions. And then when you add in questions that weaken arguments, that adds another 8-9%, and we're talking about a third of all logical reasoning questions. So it's very important to understand exactly what all of these things are asking. Back to necessary assumptions, which is the lesson of the day. We encounter a necessary assumption question, and it will ask something like, the conclusion in the passage depends on the assumption that. Which one of the following is an assumption on which the argument depends? And in taking the position outlined, the author presupposes which one of the following. Presupposes is another word for assume. And there's going to be other ways to ask, but it's going to look something like this. These are going to be necessary assumption questions. Now, a necessary assumption is going to be a premise that is unstated, okay? And the test, again, is that if we negate it, it will destroy the argument. It will be absolutely necessary for the argument to stand any chance at all. That will be the correct answer. There will be tempting answers that may strengthen the argument in general, but they will not be necessary for it to be potentially valid. And we can employ the negation test, which is kind of like checking the contrapositive, because we know the contrapositive is when you reverse and you negate, and that is the logical equivalent. But this is the way we're going to check. We're going to go on to a question here, okay? Unstated premise that if negated destroys the argument. That's the key. Right here at the bottom of the strengthened argument. Let's go here to official LSAT prep test 89, okay? Section 2. And if we go to question 4, which one of the following is an assumption required by the argument? So I'd like you students to, watching this video, to take a moment, pause this video, give yourself a minute, read it over, think about what I told you, and come back. Okay. Although smaller class sizes are popular with parents and teachers, the evidence shows that large-scale reductions in class size lead to only slight improvements in student performance. Because school finances are limited, the cost-benefit test that any educational policy must pass is not, does this policy have any positive effect, but rather, is there a more productive use of education dollars? So public funds would in fact be better spent on efforts to recruit and retain better teachers. Now, my students know that the first thing we do is decide if this is an argument or a set of facts, and we know it's an argument, so we have to hone in on the main conclusion of the argument. And sometimes that's tricky in questions like this, when there's multiple conclusions. But to do the work for you, because we're teaching, the main conclusion of this argument is so public funds would in fact be better spent on efforts to recruit and retain better teachers. Everything else leads up to this and supports this. Now, the support for this is that people like smaller class sizes, but studies have shown that when we do that, it only leads to slight improvements in student performance. Subsidiary conclusion, because school finances are limited, the cost-benefit test that any educational policy must pass is not, is there any positive effect, but is there a better productive use of education dollars? So public funds would be better spent on efforts to recruit and retain better teachers. That would be better than reducing class size. That is the argument. I'm wondering if anything pops out of you. Where's the logical leap? We've talked about class sizes. Have we talked about efforts to recruit and retain better teachers? We can only go by what's in the stimulus. Let's go on to the answers. Choices. A. Reducing class size is an extremely expensive type of educational reform measure. Okay, I'll tell you right now, boom, hits you right off the bat with a trap question, because this could be a premise that would strengthen the fact that, that reducing class size isn't that great. Okay? But is it necessary for the argument that public funds should be spent on efforts to recruit and retain better teachers? Is it necessary for that argument? It's not. Let's cross it out. B. Dollar for dollar. Efforts to recruit and retain good teachers yield larger improvement in student performance than do reductions in class size. And bam, there we have it. Dollar for dollar, efforts to recruit and retain better teachers yield larger improvements in student performance than do reductions. This is saying that this premise is assumed to be true, that it is a bigger improvement in student performance than reduction in class size. It addresses the efforts to recruit and retain better teachers. Efforts to recruit and retain better teachers. Let's do the test. Okay, what if we negated this? What if dollar for dollar efforts to recruit and retain good teachers did not yield larger improvements in student performance than reduction in class size? Well then, this argument, public funds would better be spent on efforts to recruit and retain better teachers, would be ridiculous. The argument would completely fall apart. It's over for this argument. It's a dumb argument. We don't want it. So B is the correct answer. And, just in the interest of making this short, these last ones, they are either irrelevant or they talk. So there's a couple things to look at. Where's the logical leap, and what's addressing the actual main conclusion? And if we negate it, does the argument fall apart? The answer is yes on all of that, and there we go. Again, come take a lesson with me in IBIS Prep. We'll talk about sufficient assumptions, we'll strengthening, weakening, and every type of logical reasoning question, and logic games, and reading comprehension, and we will go get our goal scores. So everyone have a great day. Happy studying. Bless.